Hello, everybody. How are you today? I hope you're well. I hope there was enough notice of this stream for folks to get here. But anyway, if not, we'll do the best we can. So, of course, there was a furious reaction to the abortion decision of the Supreme Court. A lot of anger, a lot of fury, a lot of motivation to try to do something about it. One of the things to do about it, of course, was to vote against the Republicans to show the displeasure of people with the abortion ban. I should say, with the throwing to the states the right to have an abortion ban, or not. In the elections coming up, in the midterm elections of 2022, the issue there is in most of the elections, it won't be possible for those furious with the decision or those supporting a decision to have a direct influence, on things. But in the congressional elections of 2022, depending on how they turn out, there is an opportunity, there is an opportunity for people who want to do something about the abortion decision to have at least an indirect impact on it by supplying a large majority to those who are for freedom of choice, in this instance, to those who want to fight for choice. And the obvious thing that can be done here is to deliver a large majority for Democrats, for those Democrats who are for choice, and to make it possible, therefore, for those Democrats, at least to create the potential for those Democrats to pack the Supreme Court so that a future court can change the decision that has been made. Now, noticeably, there aren't a band, of Democrats who are explicitly saying, vote for us, across the board, so we can do something about the Supreme Court decision by changing the makeup of the Supreme Court. Instead, the Democrats are running on various other things. They're still running on Trump, even though Trump is really not on the ballot this time. And even though people are not mad about Trump at this time, they're mad about choice issues. They're mad about inflation. They're mad about the war. They may still be angry about the pandemic. But there's been no attempt by Democrats to mobilize those people who are very angry at the Supreme Court decision in support of themselves. I personally think this is too bad and strategy that is foolish. But there is resistance to the Supreme Court decision going on, okay, in different ways. Steve says, I blame the Democrats for never codifying while they could have. So do I. I blame them too. But that blame is not going to do anything for us now. Okay, Kay is trying to listen to this and the hearing at the same time on the last of the Trump hearings that the House is carrying out. So let me talk about some contests that will be on the ballot come election day, where people will be able to decide whether they want their states to allow abortion or whether they want their states to ban it. There's a very good article that gives extremely good background on this, and I want to share the screen with you and go over that article. So here we are. I caught the article on Portside. It originally appeared in The Guardian. It's by Poppy Noor. I don't know much about Poppy Noor. I think she does work for The Guardian. But the title is Voters in these 5 states are voting on abortion on November 8th. If I recall, I may have forgotten to include this article in the description. So just in case I have, I'm going to enter it into the comments now so you can read it yourself. Hopefully when we're done. But anyway, here we are. The stakes could hardly be higher, and campaigners on both sides are scrambling ahead of referendums in Kentucky, Montana, California, Vermont, and Michigan. Can Kansas inspire other pro-choice wins? And she could also have asked, can the decision by the Supreme Court inspire other pro-choice wins? In this case, when Kansas voted overwhelmingly to protect abortion this summer, the 59-41 margin in the referendum in the deep red states sent shockwaves through the country, inspiring pro-choice advocates and sending anti-abortion campaigners scrambling for an unexpected political dogfight as 5 similar ballot initiatives approach in November. I should say about that, the prevailing opinion in the press now seems to be that considerable momentum has left the pro-abortion fighters since the decision by the Supreme Court. At first, of course, there was a reaction that was very strong, and it was reflected in the polls, which were more favorable to the Democrats, and which was probably responsible for the Democrats at one time building a 7-point margin in the generic polls in relation to the Republicans. But this margin has now shrunk to roughly 3 points. And I think by many people, this is considered a measure of the tailing off of feelings of anger, okay, on the part of pro-choice advocates since the end of the summer. But anyway, the abortion referenda in Kentucky, Montana, California, Vermont, and Michigan have seen both sides organize extensive campaigns. Kentucky and Montana, which of course both red like Kansas, it was Republicans and anti-abortion advocates who brought the initiatives with the aim of removing abortion protections from state constitutions. They say the Kansas loss was an outlier because the language on the ballot in that particular referendum was too confusing for the result to be reflective of Kansans' will. Hoping to avoid the same fate, the Kentucky ballot will ask voters to agree with the statement: nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to secure or protect a right to abortion or require the funding of abortion. I shifted a little in my chair. I hope. Yeah, I seem to be still visible to the camera, so I think that's all right. Although Kentucky is reliably Republican, its Supreme Court, which will decide a week after the referendum whether the state's current abortion ban is viable, does not yet clearly lean one way on abortion rights. Probably should have said one way or another on abortion rights. Quote, the stakes are kind of like they were in Kansas, said Rachel Reboucher, the dean of Temple University School of Law. Quote, you have a red state with a history of anti-abortion legislation, and if the electorate says no to this ballot, it will send a clear signal that there's a disconnect between the voters and the state and the legislators who would otherwise pass anti-abortion laws, unquote. She cautioned, however, that it was not clear Kentuckians will turn out to vote in the same way Kansans did. Kentucky's electorate also skews more conservative on reproductive rights, with a 12-point margin between those who want abortion to be mostly legal and mostly illegal, according to the New York Times, although that analysis appeared to undercount the support for abortion in Kansas, predicting a neck-and-neck race that was far from the 18-point margin that materialized in August in favor of abortion rights. Quote, there's the general sense that Kentucky is a harder fight. People suspect the ballot initiative will be successful, or if it fails, it won't be by as wide a margin as in Kansas, says Professor Reboucher. Well, that sounds about right. It probably won't be by as wide a margin as in Kansas, because it's unlikely that lightning is going to strike twice, as they say. But if there's a victory at all for abortion rights, then that will be very, very encouraging to the abortion advocates, or the abortion rights advocates, I should say. In Montana, Republicans are pushing a more confusingly worded measure, stating that infants born alive after an abortion are legal persons. That seems strange. I'm not even sure what that means. Okay, if the abortion is successful, how can infants be born alive? And why would you have to state that if they are born alive, that they would be legal persons, would or would not be legal persons? Of course, if they're alive, they're legal persons. Why do you have to mention it? So I'm not clear about what this means, and maybe the voters in Montana also won't be clear about what this means. Okay, anyway, the measure also threatens medical providers with up to 20 years in prison and fines of up to $50,000. Montana's Supreme Court has ruled that the state constitution's right to privacy protects the right to abortion. So if there's a yes vote, for this ballot, that would not explicitly ban the procedure. So I guess I wonder what the significance of this particular ballot initiative is. It's kind of hard to make out. And the next paragraph says, but experts worry the wording of the ballot could confuse people in a red state where the electorate, like in Kansas, is nonetheless largely in favor of abortion rights. Yes, if this ballot initiative does confuse people, it might hurt the vote that would otherwise be in favor of abortion rights. Quote, the bill is intended to incrementally change the narrative to recognize fetal personhood and to limit abortion because it demands doctors provide care to infants born alive after an abortion. But quote unquote, I see. A subtle attempt to recognize fetal personhood. But if the infants are born alive, aren't they automatically persons? I'm still having trouble with this. Said legal historian Mary Siegler from University of California at Davis. Quote, this wording is intended to make pro-choice groups look extreme if they campaign against the bill. Oh, how subtle. This bill then is about playing games and trying to confuse people. So no matter how it turns out, you won't know what it means. Two abortion ballots where a pro-choice result seemed almost certain, says Poppy, seems almost certain in California and Vermont, where abortion rights groups are hoping not just to protect, but to expand pre-existing protections for abortion and other reproductive rights. California's ballot proposal asks for abortion protections to be written into the state constitution, shielding rights from the whims of changing governments, and also covers a right to contraception, something pro-choice advocates are worried about since the fall of Roe. Considering the political makeup of California, where Democrats outnumber Republicans 3-1 in the Assembly and the Senate, and most observers are expecting a win for abortion rights. A recent poll showed a 71-18 margin for those in favor of the amendment among registered voters in California. And among them, 35% of Republicans backed the referendum too. Similar to California, Vermont's measure looks to shore up pre-existing abortion protections in the state's constitution, with its ballot proposal asking to add a line to the Constitution, quote, that an individual's right to personal reproductive autonomy is central to the liberty and dignity to determine one's own life course and shall not be denied or infringed unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved by the least restrictive means. Certainly wording that is very pro reproductive rights. It too looks to be an easy win in a state so pro-choice, even the Republican governor supports the amendment. Yes, of course, that's Michigan we're talking about now, not California. In California, the Democratic governor supports the amendment. Anyway, finally, it is Michigan where the stakes feel highest this November. Its political battle for abortion rights centers around a 1931 abortion ban law that was written pre-Roe, and it's about, the political battle is whether it can spring back into action. 750,000 Michiganders brought the ballot initiative, hoping to persuade voters to make the old ban unviable by enshrining protection for abortion in the state's constitution. By the way, people who live in Michigan are known as Michiganders. I always wondered about that. I went to graduate school, in Michigan, so I have a soft spot for the state. But I always thought it was funny that they were Michiganders, as opposed to Michigoose or Michigeese, or maybe Michiganers, if you catch my meaning. Anyway, they are Michiganders. Everybody in Michigan agrees about that. Anyway, Republicans, perceiving a threat, already tried to block the referendum by claiming the signatures collected were incorrectly spaced. A decision that was quickly dismissed by the state Supreme Court. I thought that was interesting. The anti-abortion lobby knows 64% of Michiganders in a recent poll specifically said they support adding a constitutional protection for abortion through the ballot initiative. And more general polling has also shown broad support for abortion rights, with 55% of Michiganders believing it should be mostly legal versus 39% who believe it should be mostly illegal, according to the same New York Times study. That 16-point margin would put Michigan in the company of states like Illinois, Minnesota, and California when it comes to abortion rights, said Ziegler. Still, pro-choice campaigners are hesitant to view the Michigan ballot as a clear win, especially with huge amounts of money pouring into the campaign on both sides, in a state that is deeply purple, tending to elect Democrats to the Senate and the presidency, but Republicans for statewide office. When I lived in the state, it was deeply blue, not at all deeply purple. It seemed, when I left there in 1965, that would never change. Never change. Anyway, abortion support is not necessarily partisan or evident through polls, and ultimately, without deep communication and education, we can't predetermine success or failure, said Chris Melody Fields Figueredo, executive director of the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center. If Kansas showed us anything, it's that we don't know how voters will go, unquote. And Poppy Noor is the deputy features editor for Guardian US. And her Twitter is @PoppyNoor if you want to ask her a question about this. I think the political splits here are very interesting. I think the strategies reflected in the way the ballot initiatives were written, are also very interesting. I think if the pro-abortion position wins in 4 out of 5 of these states, it will probably mark, another clear victory for the pro-abortion rights decision. Or I should say the pro-abortion rights side of the argument, since, of course, the decision by the Supreme Court was very anti-abortion, in my view. So that's where things immediately stand with respect to the reproductive rights issue. I would hope that over the next 3 or 4 weeks, the Democrats would bring to the table the idea that if people really want to do something about the Supreme Court decision, they had better return Democrats to a majority. Okay. I'm not saying they will deliver a court that's packed so that this and other very, very bad decisions can be overturned quickly. Okay. Because you know the Democrats. They very rarely do anything good. They very rarely do anything that's needed. But what I am saying is to have a hope that the Supreme Court will change, you have to return people to office who are clearly pro-abortion rights, pro-reproductive rights. Okay, if you don't do that, you cannot hope to do anything about this particular abortion decision until quite a few years from now. So this is really the last chance to do anything nationally about this. You have to take a chance on the Democrat, and then you have to fight hard to see that the Democrats who win do go ahead and change the character of the court. That is a hugely important thing that they could do. And it's only recognizing reality that for them to do that requires that they have substantial majorities in both the Senate and the House. Now, to be direct and honest, which I always try to be, we all know that the polls right now are showing that there may be a Democratic victory in the Senate. If it occurs, it will probably be narrow. But it looks like the Republicans are going to have a victory in the House. The polls showing a margin of 3 points in favor of the Democrats. Also exists in a context where for a number of elections now, it has seemed that for Democrats to win a victory in the House, they must have a margin of 7 points in terms of the generic ballot. If they don't have a 7-point margin, they're not likely to win. And that seems like, it's the reality. Maybe coming out in favor of court packing would increase their approval rating by another 4 points. Maybe that's how they can win the House. I don't know, but I'm saying the way things are going now, it doesn't look like they're going to do it. Steve Wolfbrandt asks, a good question. If we set the precedent of packing the court, won't they do the same when they come to power? Sure. But if we do what Roosevelt did and his administration did, specifically tax and tax, spend and spend, elect and elect, they won't come to power again for at least 20 years. And even then, they'll have only one House of Congress. That's what we have to keep in mind. What we have to keep in mind is, yes, if we set a precedent of packing the court, it may be a dangerous precedent at some time in the future. But If the party that does that continues to aggressively serve the people in the numerous ways the Democrats did between 1933 and 1953, there won't be any Republicans coming back. If they keep on doing it, there may never be any Republicans coming back. We got to keep that in mind. We got to constantly look at the upside, not constantly look at the downside. So there we are. Thanks for the comments, and thanks for coming, everyone. I will see you again in about 15 minutes or 4 o'clock. I have another stream coming down the pike then. I also have a stream. It's the succession to the Dump the Incumbents program on this channel. Specifically, it's Embracing Democracy, Dump the Corruption, Part 1. That's going to go on at 9 o'clock tonight. I expect that Ezra will be with me. I don't know if Lisa will be. I know she's had a tough day with her family, some illness, and all kinds of other occurrences that have happened. So I'm not sure she will be there, but she knows about the program. She knows what to expect. I think she'll do her best to be with us. So hopefully I'll see you in 15 minutes. You'll stick around, and I will be back then. Thank you.